Hello, my name is Java Teixeira. I'm an international relations student at the Institute of International Relations of PUC-Rio and research intern of the project Brasil Global. Today I'm here with Professor Chris Alden from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Welcome, Professor Chris Alden, and thank you for this interview.
Thank you for having me.
To what extent is IBSA still a valid platform for the participating countries?
To my mind, IBSA remains valid and important. The issues that brought the IBSA countries together remain important. That is to say, developing countries of the South are facing equivalent social economic challenges. So that, in that sense, it remains very important and appropriate to continue with.
Okay, and did it lose its purpose given the creation of BRICS?
Yeah, I think the thing about the BRICS is that there is overlap, clearly, in terms of the countries that participate. BRICS, however, is a much more geopolitical entity than IBSA is. IBSA, I think, has development more at the center. So I don't think it lost its purpose, but there's certainly overlap. I think there's also an issue about capacity. Can institutions within all of the three IBSA countries sustain in parallel two roughly overlapping initiatives? And I think that's a political question that the political leaders need to address themselves.
Do you think it's possible to compare the more recent Chinese policies towards Latin America to the Chinese experience in Africa?
I think there are some points of comparison. I think the points of comparison, first and foremost, come in the form of the Chinese approaching Latin America in ways in the ways they approached Africa. That is to say, a resource-rich continent with which they could trade infrastructure, concessional loans for resources in exchange for resources. What they have learned, however, is that Latin America is a different place. It's industrialized or partially industrialized countries. There's a great and active civil society that isn't always present in some of the African countries, and it's a much more complex environment than one finds in many of the African countries.
Maybe more similar to South Africa.
That's true.
And does Chinese policies towards Latin America affect the U.S. leadership in the region?
I think that it's quite interesting because I think the United States has more or less observed without acting in one expected, and certainly the Chinese expected a greater reaction from Washington to the arrival of China as an economic player in the continent, and we haven't seen that. I think that there is a line, a kind of geostrategic line that might be crossed at some point, and one could see reverberations of this with Venezuela and the relationship there. So, but by and large, Washington has been viewing it with interest without acting.
And last, do you think there's coordination in the BRICS countries' policies for Africa, or are they competitive actors?
I think it's a bit of both. When the BRICS Development Bank comes into play, that will represent the high point, I think, of coordination. An idea, an institutional idea where loans and policies will be harmonized with the partial aim, at least, of addressing African development concerns. At the same time, individual companies are competitors in markets. For instance, in the agricultural sector, which Brazil excels at, you also have Chinese firms, you have Indian firms, all jostling for a position or a stake, if you like, in that very potentially lucrative sector. So I think you can look at it in sectoral terms and you'll see competition. If you look at it in aggregate across the board, you'll see more recently an impulse for coordination.
So thank you so much for this interview, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did.
Muito obrigado.